Welcome back to Echo Ridge. Today, we're going to start on a project that's probably going to take 2, possibly even 3 episodes. And it all stems from this massive amount of oil that we have. As a quick disclaimer, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, this one's going to be a little shorter. For one, because like I said, it's going to take me quite a bit of time to do everything we need to do just to be able to prep the project. But for two, I'm also in the middle of a big studio move, so unfortunately this will be the only video that you will get for probably about 10 days. I hope to get back into the workflow as soon as possible, but at the minimum I wanted to give you a heads up, especially in the case if you were a new Patreon or YouTube member. I didn't want you to think that I forget about you. Don't worry, you are on the roster already, and your dupe is eagerly awaiting being printed. As many of you know, oil turns into petroleum. Petroleum, when being fed to petroleum generators, not only provides more power for the colony, but also produces 750 grams per second of polluted water. Now, typically what happens is we take a wonderful oil well, we stick it on all of these oil reservoirs, it produces oil, we throw all the oil into an oil refinery, and we get petroleum and natural gas back on the other side. The problem with this conversion is for every 10 kilos of crude oil you put through it, you only get 5 kilos worth of petroleum, which in effect halves the amount of water we would end up getting per kilo of oil once it's converted into petroleum and then thrown in the petroleum generator. In comes the wonderful petroleum boiler. Now, I've built several petroleum boilers in the past, to include this most recent one on our Twitch series, the Twin Petroleum Boiler, and I also recently built this little guy. And the reason why I did is because I wanted to run an experiment, because the comments tell us that you actually get more water out of the petroleum boiler process than it takes to generate the oil through the oil wells. We typically use 3 oil wells simultaneously because each oil well can produce 3.3 kilos worth of crude oil per second, so it just makes sense to put them in groups of 3. Well, when I did this, I started off with 5 tons of clean water. I also made sure to pre-charge the system so the oil sitting on top of the oil well is not being included, nor was all the petroleum that is left on the boiler plate and on the counterflow runs. And the long and short of it is, it's true. For the 5 tons of water that I put into this system, I got back out 6.201 tons. In other words, the 5 tons of water that we fed to the oil wells that produced oil, that then went through the petroleum boiler, giving us that 1-to-1 conversion from crude oil to petroleum, and then feeding that petroleum into petroleum generators, generated us 24% more water than it took, which means this whole process is a net positive in terms of water. Because remember, we can take that polluted water and convert it to regular water by either boiling it or running it through a water sieve. Either method works. 5 kilos of polluted water goes in, 5 kilos of clean water come back out. So because water is so critical on this planetoid, in order to keep all the dupes breathing, it makes perfect sense for us to run a petroleum boiler on this colony. Except we're going to do it a little bit different, because we're not going to spend any water in order to get all the water out of that process. Insert our friend the slickster. Slicksters produce oil, just like the oil well does. The only difference is the oil well requires water, whereas the slickster only requires carbon dioxide, 20 kilos per cycle to be precise. Well, if you remember from the beginning of this rather long explanation, the petroleum generator itself produces 500 grams per second of carbon dioxide. In fact, if we take the 500 grams per second, multiply it times the 600, and then divide it by the 20 kilos per cycle that the slicksters require, one petroleum generator running flat out can support up to 15 slicksters. Now, the slickster will only produce 10 kilos per cycle because they produce 50% of their consumed mass. So 20 kilos of carbon dioxide in, 10 kilos worth of crude oil out. Alas though, our petroleum generators require 2 kilos worth of petroleum per second in order to produce that much carbon dioxide. So Yeah, a petroleum generator can produce enough carbon dioxide to support 15 slicksters. 15 slicksters cannot produce enough crude oil to support a petroleum generator. If only we had another source of carbon dioxide around the colony. Oh, that's right, we do. All of the duplicants are exhaling carbon dioxide, and somewhere on this colony we also have a carbon dioxide geyser. Not that I can find it to save my life. What are the odds that it is this unearthed geyser right here? We had discovered it when we dug up here to continue cleaning out the oil biome. So that could possibly be another source of carbon dioxide. Well, Echo, I thought you said the petroleum generator produces enough carbon dioxide to support 15 slicksters. And it does. The difference is, if I can run more than 15 slicksters, let's say 40, ergo, we'd be getting a lot more crude oil out and thus more water once we convert it to petroleum and send it through the petroleum generator. I suppose it's safe to go up here. The only thing up here in liquid form is liquid chlorine, which we don't care much about. Oh, wait a minute. There's a bunch of snow. So what I'm going to do is just build a wonderful catch here. All that stuff will fall down into here. And that way I don't have to worry about it. We'll dig through this and I'll find out what is behind door number 1, and it'll give us a path forward. But before we continue, it is time to print another duplicant. And anytime I see a boop with a suit training booster, they sort of win by default. Because without me even having to mess with them, they're already going to be fine going into an atmosuit. Not great, but good enough. So welcome to the colony, duplicant number 157-270. Another aspect of this whole process is the fact that we have a lot of existing crude oil that came with the biome. All of it is going to be able to be converted into petroleum and then ultimately water, which is really what we're after. Now the power, that's just going to be an added benefit, because even with all of our geothermal power running, our batteries don't ever get chock full. In fact, this whole geothermal power plant is just sort of keeping us at status quo, thanks to the 480 watts each power bank charger requires, and for us shooting at 100 bionic dupes, at the minimum we need 50 power bank chargers, plus a couple of extra to take into account transport time and that sort of stuff. So in this project, there's going to be a few different stages. The first is going to be building the petroleum boiler itself. Temporarily, we're just going to store all that petroleum. The second stage is going to be a dirty brick, or something else that I think of in the meantime. The reason why is because with the petroleum generators producing carbon dioxide and polluted water, it's more difficult to put it in here. Although the added heat would be a benefit. Right now it's up to 140 in here because, well, I realized we're up to 7.4 tons of lime. So I wanted to start generating more steel, which does a great job of increasing the heat around here. Petroleum generators would do as well. The issue becomes getting rid of the carbon dioxide. So there's a chance I might add a door crusher into this system. The issue with running a door crusher is, yes, it'll get rid of a bunch of carbon dioxide, but if it's not designed carefully, it'll also get rid of some of this wonderful steam. And especially if we end up putting those petroleum generators in here, we want that steam to be condensed and then added to our general water tank. So I think that is what we will do with the petroleum generators. And I suppose before we even start the petroleum boiler, I need to do some vacuuming because the petroleum boiler itself needs to be in a vacuum. Additionally, the slicksters don't want to be in a vacuum. They want to consume all the carbon dioxide. So I need to get rid of all these other gases and then probably seal it up. And then I'll have some system that just pumps all the carbon dioxide that we get in and around the colony into that area. So it'd probably be a good idea just to get rid of these carbon skimmers now that I'm at it. We will add a bunch of mesh tiles here so all this carbon dioxide can float down through here. And then as for our gas pumps that take all the excess non-oxygen gases and send them to the vacuum of space, all we have to do is add a gas filter. We have 2 of them right now in the colony, one over here and one over here. It would be cleaner if I just send this one straight through. So I'll fix that. And then all the carbon dioxide is going to be filtered out and sent all the way back down to the biome where we're going to be feeding all of our slicksters. For now, though, I'm going to separate this and just send it off directly to the vacuum of space, because to the vacuuming I go once again, especially if they will ever finish digging this out. And it turned out to be a polluted water vent. That's not what I was expecting. Where's my carbon dioxide vent? Oh, it's in here. The problem with the carbon dioxide vent is it produces carbon dioxide at minus 55. I mean, this is good news, to be honest. It's more water, and more water is exactly what we needed. So what I'll end up doing is sealing it in, put a pump in it, and somehow send it all the way back to this line here. Maybe I should just refine it first into clean water? I don't know. I'm already going to have a few pipes in here to include petroleum going up. I suppose I could just connect it right in here and send it off to get sieved or be used for our puffed branches. Where are our puffs? Here they go. Speaking of pufflets, there were some comments about the mystery of the pufflet from the last episode that said pufflets can't sleep while flying. They have to find a tile to sleep on. Well, as we just saw, that pufflet was sleeping just fine in midair, but just in case, I did add some mesh tiles over here, so if they really want to crawl up and nap on the floor, instead of the wonderful airborne critter condo, they can. And look, it's already time for another dupe. And it looks like this one we have no choice. It's a gizmo. Starts with the digging booster, which will also give us the +2 to athletics. And they just have decreased athletics for -3 and decreased agriculture. Oh, Gizmo, you're going to have a great time in the Atmosuits. Welcome to the colony Dupe 158 DBK. Looking at this area here, this is probably where we're going to put our petroleum boiler. And that'll leave us plenty of room for slicksters over here. You know what? All of those petroleum boilers would be well suited to being in this area as well, because they would just produce more carbon dioxide for the slicksters. Let me clean this whole place up, give us lots of room for activities, and then maybe we'll just put the petroleum generators in the same biome, just somehow capture the polluted water before it flashes. This is going to be a pain in the tuchus. There's a lot of water in here. Look, I told you it was going to be a multi-episode project. In fact, I can throw all the water that I'm collecting in this area and this area right onto this line, and then send it somehow down here right before the filters, and then the filters will rack and stack the liquid and send it wherever it needs to go. Oh boy, this is going to be a mess. I'll be back in 50 or so cycles. Make that 75 cycles, as a matter of fact. Some dupe in the course of this digging has dropped some ice into our wonderful biome here. Because why wouldn't they have? I should have expected it. I guess there's nothing I can do now except clean it up and stop my complaining. It's going slowly, is the best way to say it. This time the pod gave us an option. We have an Eduardo and a chip, but once again, this Eduardo has a suit training booster, and as a bonus, their only negatives are decreased medicine and science. Welcome to duplicate number 159, Soph. In the massive cleanup that we are doing down here, which is probably a little bit of overkill, because if I add this many slicksters to this colony, it will for sure make the performance even lower than it already is. But I've also realized I have this area, which is, well, normally vacuumed out. We're still picking up the little oopsie from 2 episodes ago. That's how long everything takes here. But what I might be able to do is bring this heat spike all the way up and over and put the petroleum boiler right here. I can then ship all of that petroleum over here into whatever weird petroleum generator slickster sauna that I come up with. Either way, as warned in the beginning of this video, this one was going to be a little bit shorter. I do appreciate you understanding the reason for the brief exodus, and hope you enjoyed this shorter episode that is a prelude to some much bigger projects. So until next time, much love, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.